The climate movement is at its essence a people's movement. If we want to be able to engage with people, we can't have our rhetoric centered around hatred and fear and doom. It needs to be centered around love and care and joy.
We are not going to build the kind of power that needs to be built just by getting people who already define themselves as climate activists to fight harder. It's going to happen by building a much broader coalition with all kinds of unlikely or apparently unlikely allies, and just more people seeing themselves in this movement, and including things that can tangibly improve life right now.
The Climate Justice Study Collective was convened by a group of us at the UBC Center for Climate Justice. And the idea was really to get a broad range of people from Vancouver and its region to understand what are the key front lines of climate justice organizing today. But I think even more than just getting a group together, we were really open to one another to see what the word climate justice even meant in the different communities people are speaking from and with. We had really, really fruitful discussions that I think changed our understandings and also some of our activism, research, and organizing as well. But we realized that we needed to share some of our discussions and some of our ideas that came up, and so we decided to host a panel in downtown Vancouver to share with a broader audience what we had kind of come to together.
You know, the city is a class war. This city is so incredibly divided.
We heard from one senior tenant that she really felt trapped in her home. Trapped by a housing market that she couldn't move because she was on a fixed income and there's no way that she could compete on an open market for rents. But also trapped, not just during the summer, during the heat, trapped during the winter with the extreme cold, with flooding, with wildfire smoke. And so what that points to is the radical importance of tenant organizing here in Vancouver as a climate action.
So the 2021 heat dome was sort of maybe that first big red flag that we are now going to have our housing system tested in ways it hasn't been tested before. We haven't tailored our rules, our regulations, our laws around providing people adequate housing. And there are all kinds of shortcomings in our current housing system that way. One of those has been cooling, where there has not been a minimum cooling requirement. There isn't an obvious or clear right to a cool unit anywhere in BC. As people are exposed more and more to extreme heat, that is something that is going to have to change.
500 people died last year, and like a large percentage of those were downtown Eastside residents, right? Elderly, people stuck in terrible SROs that were already heat traps themselves. There's no fire hazards and unsanitary water, and there's very vulnerable people there. With the one hotel doesn't have an elevator. People are dragging their wheelchairs up the stairs. The housing agencies that are governing these places are just being totally irresponsible and neglectful of the people, right?
These are the kind of things we talk about between myself and the population, the downtown east side, about poverty. And we look at the history of who we are as Native people, why we have that poverty today. Because we didn't receive the same education as the colonizers. They didn't give us that opportunity to sit in a classroom, but yet we had the teachers of the natural laws and how we take care of Siaxnium, Stomach, our families, and Tamathislanite, the Mother Earth. In that song I sang, the grandmother sang that song to let the people know it's time for us to go and help. We're thinking of that future for our children. And that's why our people are taught, gather the people the way you are now and talk about what needs to be done and get it done.
I think climate change, resiliency and responsibility for downtown Eastside would probably look like the housing management people taking a bit more responsibility to engage with the residents and have resources provided for them, training them how to stay cool, and also creating opportunities for them to participate in environmental responsibility. People are floundering and sort of don't have anything to do, so we can create opportunities for them, for the younger people to help the older people, right?
Many of the students who are workers, who work overwhelmingly in retail, had these really horrific stories about how they had, during the heat dome, they had been prevented from providing water to unhoused folks. And that was really traumatic for them, that they were not allowed to help people who were coming to them saying that they needed to cool down with air conditioning in a mall or something like that. And they really wanted to do that. So maybe that's something that we think about, like the right to help, right, as a workplace issue.
When 2019 came around and I first started getting involved with the student climate strikes, of course, the first thing that popped into my head was, why aren't workers all out on strike, and how powerful would that be? But a couple of months ago, the Ford government in Ontario wanted to defeat a group of workers in schools who were going on strike for wages that would meet inflation. And they passed a piece of legislation and invoked the notwithstanding clause, and to just say that these workers weren't going to be allowed to strike. And the labor movement did something really incredible that we haven't seen in this country in a long time. Union after union went to meetings and said, if those education workers in Ontario go out and this law is used against them, we will go out too. And within, I think, about a week, workers in Ontario had planned a general strike. And within 2 weeks, that law was actually retracted. And so forcing a government to retract a law is actually a really major achievement. And imagine if we could use that power, to stop a pipeline or, to prevent Coastal GasLink from the Indigenous land theft that's going on.
There's often talk in the climate movement more broadly of this, like, how do we recapture 2019, like that moment with the huge strikes, right? And that was the high point just in terms of bodies in streets, right? There's this idea that we just need like a reboot, like as if societies are computers and we just like turn it off and turn it back on again. And I don't think that that's going to work 3 years after the pandemic, where people are so shattered by all of these crises.
In the span of less than a decade, we've gone from people not being sure climate change was real to feeling that probably it's too late to do anything about it on some level. And too often in environmental circles, we've kind of dismissed people who don't agree with us, and we just can't do that anymore. And this is where the techniques used in deep canvassing come in. Deep canvassing is the practice of deliberately talking with and having conversations with people who do not agree with you, or at least who do not yet agree with you. And the first step is genuinely listening to people to understand where they're coming from, and then peeling back the layers to establish a starting place for moving forward together. So we need to be better storytellers, sharing our vision of an equitable and just, multi-ethnic, safe climate future in language that's tailored for the mainstream.
It's so essential to remember that this is not just a fight against the power and against the powerful, but rather a fight for the people. Right now, I think that we are moving towards something that is a lot more intersectional, that is a lot more stable, that engages people in a much more real way, where we acknowledge how the cost of groceries and the cost of housing is so inherently tied to and a part of the climate crisis.
We're talking about allies. Our mother's creating allies every day. When she burns Alberta to the ground, she's creating allies. When she causes floods, she's creating allies. And we aren't reaching out to them.
People need connection, they need culture, they need healing, right? And if we don't offer that, I don't think we're going to be reviving much of anything at all. And I don't think we should be trying just to revive something that happened in the past.
We've got a whole country full of leaders who have never been to the mountain. The Vision Quest for us is a sacred thing, which was given to us by the spirits, in which We go up on the mountain and we sit there until we find out what we're about and what we should be doing in this life. Dave Cushane says, if you haven't gone there and you haven't found that out and you haven't got that anchor, he says, then the wind will blow you wherever it wants to. And the wind in this society is money.
There was no loss for us to take that salmon for our need and share it. We have a word in our language, spanach. We're willing to share it. We're rich.
Racism isn't a moral oversight. It's a really intentional and strategically designed system of oppression that was designed as a political wedge that allows the elites, the corporate class, the billionaire class, to hold power and to continue exploiting our natural systems and labor, largely at the expense of Indigenous communities and historical Black communities on these lands. We see the immense environmental racism and health effects of that. And so that means white organizing really taking accountability and responsibility to be able to organize themselves, their community members, family members, into an anti-racist movement for climate justice. It's time to stop seeing anti-racism as this daunting personal chore or this individual learning opportunity, and time to start seeing it as the key strategic intervention that we need to win.